my like one of the first things I was thinking of is how you were saying you kind of just started following the Bible and you saw that it changed your life back when you were 18. So my whole thing, the way I thought about it was, if you would have read like the same book, the same, but it just didn't involve a higher power, like, do you think it just wouldn't have worked?
I don't think so, because the point of the book is to show that was key with the Bible, as opposed to, let's say, a lot of self-help books, is a lot of them put the onus on you to make all the changes. And that's not to say that I'm against something like personal responsibility, but there's something about having to struggle with the problem. The key word there, struggle, is how many people struggle with their problems? People struggle all the time with stuff. And Jesus is coming in and basically saying, you know what, you can't struggle with it. You can't do it on your own. And so there was a relief there, knowing, okay, I have to stop trying to be good. And that was almost like a burden was lifted. Like, I don't have to try to be good, because trying is the mistake. I can't try. I need help. Someone else is going to do it for me. So what compounds a problem is thinking you can struggle your way out of your issues and your problems. It's like struggling in quicksand. You're just going to sink faster. So to get a little bit into psychology, and some psychologists have, it's funny, some of them will touch on something that subscribes to biblical principles, but I think it was Carl Jung that said that you cannot solve a problem on the same level of consciousness as the one that started it. So in other words, if you have a certain mindset and that mindset is causing you all these problems and issues, well, then you rely on that same mind to save you from the same problems it created. You know what I mean? So here we have these brains, we have our minds, right? Your mind, for whatever reason, right? It could be that maybe we're traumatized by something, maybe we're struggling with some kind of addiction, but our brain basically, our own weaknesses cause a problem, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, our brain caused a problem, but now we're going to rely on our brain to fix that? Does that make sense?
I mean, I would have to say I kind of disagree with that, because we do that all the time. So you constantly make mistakes and you learn from those mistakes.
Sure.
It's still like you. Like, if I burn my hand on something, like, my brain, that was me doing that, and now I know not to do that. You get what I'm saying?
Sure.
So that was like the most basic.
There are basic levels. Yeah. There is a learning, there is a cunning, there's a cleverness that I think everybody can kind of subscribe to and go like, hey, if you eat at a bad fast food place and you get food poisoning, it's probably not smart to eat there again. There's a certain practicality, I think, a lot of people have, in that they can learn, like you say, if I touch this, it's going to burn me. But if you think of reoccurring problems, like if a person, let's say, has a problem with their temper, well, it's a problem with their temper because they can't seem to get their temper out of the way. If a person is neurotic, or if they're OCD, or let's say they're just a selfish person, and I kind of know I'm selfish, but I just can't seem to help it. Maybe a person has a problem with smoking. So whatever it is, they can't seem to overcome it.
And you think because they haven't subscribed to the belief of God, you think because they still, that's what I'm trying to understand right now. It's like you to a certain extent, and correct me if I'm wrong, you believe that the only way for you to be able to live a good, fruitful life is for you to be in the path of God, right?
Right.
Now, what I would ask you, for example, is what about people, for example, that do not believe in God and that are doing great things? So, for example, let's say you don't believe in God, but you're donating money, you volunteer.
Sure.
What would you think of them?
Well, I would applaud them on their behavior. There's definitely, and keep in mind, there's places in the Bible, and Paul talks about this. He noticed, this was shortly after Jesus had lived, died, rose again, and now Jesus had ascended to heaven. It was basically Jesus out of the picture now. And Paul was saying, we have the law here, God's moral law. And he noticed, hey, the Greeks over here, there's a lot of Greeks that are doing what God wants, even though they don't even know who God is. And so I think it's common to find people who are doing some good things without very little or no knowledge of God. So I think there might be a little spark in there that is kind of leading them to do good things. But ultimately, though, I mean, here's the thing, and this analogy might kind of help explain it a little better, is, we're talking about, what about a person that's doing all these good things, right? So let's say you donate money to charity, you help the homeless, you help the widows and orphans, and that's all great. But then you go out and you rob somebody's home, right? Now, are you going to serve time for that?
Well, it depends. Did you get caught?
Let's say you get caught, you're convicted, right?
Okay.
You're guilty of it, right?
Okay.
Does it matter that you donated to charity?
Doesn't.
So in other words, there has to be justice done because regardless, you broke the law. So you are on the hook for justice being done. People will say, well, you have these people over here that they're doing all these good things. That's great. But if I did good things and I robbed a bank, you're still on the hook for doing those bad things. Like, in other words, and part of this is just the human nature tends to perceive things as a scale. If I do so many good things, it's going to outweigh the bad things. And then therefore, once I've tipped the scale towards the good side, now I'm a good person. Well, I mean, there was a great article. It was written by Matt Walsh, and he pointed out that there was this pediatric dentist. I think it was back east. And this guy had done dental work, sometimes for free, for kids for decades. Well, then it turns out he had molested a few kids. Now, are we to say that, because he did, this pro bono work for free, that outweighs?
No, obviously it wouldn't, because, it depends on what you were doing, and I get that point.
So in other words, like, we can do these good things, but we have to keep in mind that doing good things doesn't mean that cancels out us doing things that are awful.
Okay, so for example, let's say you're religious and you believe that to a certain extent, God is the reason you do good is because of God, right?
Right.
And the reason you do bad is because
rebellious.
So
don't want to do things you want to do things your own way.
But how is that like a debate? It's like damn if I do, damn if I don't. It's like if everything that's good, it's God,
right? And
everything that's bad is just you. How does that make sense? How would you explain that? Because then, do you have any choice in that sense? So every time, it's pretty much everything that's positive in your life has to be with God, and everything that's negative is just your fault. That to me doesn't make sense.
Well, you have to look at it from the perspective of you have these rules that are established, right? So
are those rules established in a way that, for example, like we're talking about faith, right?
Sure.
So like these rules, for example, that you're talking about, but these rules they're not like, for example, like science laws. This is more of like an idea, right?
Okay.
That you choose to follow, right?
Sure.
Now, based on these laws, for example, that you follow, they're not like they're not something that we can measure, and this is a lot of perspective, right? That's how I'm at. I want to kind of get an idea of like how you think. A lot of these things that you're talking about, it's perspective, and we would have to define terms to get into more details of it. But my point to you is, if you were trying to sell this to somebody, just like, for example, like, let me break it down for you. How would you sell it? Because to me, like, when people that are not religious, they look at this and they're like, this looks a little off, because you literally, if you do something good, you don't get the credit for it. And if you do something bad, you get the full credit. That seems a little corny. And another example for the main example that people bring out is, okay, if there is a God,
right?
And what about the people, for example, in other countries that are dying, that have no food? What about them?